He drove the same night shift for 9 years and never thought twice about the fares. They blurred together after the first year, the drunks, the nurses, the airport runs at 4 a.m. Then, on a Tuesday in March, a woman got in at 2:47 in the morning and gave him an address he didn't recognize. He found it on the map and drove there. When they arrived, there was nothing, a chain link fence, a patch of dead grass, the faint concrete outline of a foundation. She got out anyway. She asked him to wait. Frank Delgado had been driving for a rideshare company since 2015. He chose the night shift by design, not because the money was better, though it was, but because the city was different after midnight. Quieter, the roads cleared out, the conversations, when they happened, were shorter and more honest. He was 51 years old. He lived alone in a second-floor apartment 20 minutes from the airport. He had 2 grown kids he saw on holidays and a sister he called every Sunday. Nothing complicated, the job was simple. Pick up, drop off. Don't talk unless they want to talk. Don't ask where they're going because it's already on the screen. Over 9 years, the city had become familiar to him in the way that only nighttime familiarity can produce. Not as a place of landmarks and activity, but as a system of distances, of known turns and predictable delays, of lights that meant something at 2 a.m. that they didn't mean at noon. He had seen things. A man who cried the entire way from a hospital to a hotel. A teenager who asked to be driven around for 2 hours and never explained why. A woman who fell asleep before he even started the engine and had to be woken gently when they arrived. He had learned not to ask. He had learned not to carry it home. That Tuesday had started like any other. His first fare was at 10:15 p.m. By 2 a.m. he was considering calling it a night. Then the notification came through. Pickup. Corner of 5th and Aldrich. Destination. 114 Meredith Street. The woman was already at the curb when he pulled up. She was in her late 40s, maybe 50, calm, unremarkable, dressed like someone who had been traveling. She said hello. She didn't look at her phone. She looked out the window. He found 114 Meredith Street on the map without any trouble. It was 18 minutes away, in a part of the city that had been slowly redeveloped over the past decade. Old industrial blocks turned into condominiums and storage facilities and small warehouses with no clear purpose. He had driven through the area before. He didn't recognize the specific address. They didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. He took the route the app suggested. She sat behind him on the right side, her hands in her lap. Once, he glanced in the rearview mirror and she was looking straight out the window at nothing in particular. Not tired, not anxious, just looking. When he turned onto Meredith Street, he slowed. The block was quiet, a row of low-rise apartment buildings on one side, a self-storage facility behind a fence on the other. Then a gap, a rectangular lot enclosed by chain link, with a concrete rectangle set into the earth where a foundation had been poured and later abandoned or cleared. A single street lamp stood at the far edge of the lot, casting a column of pale yellow light across the dead grass. He pulled to the curb and stopped. "This is 114, he said. She was already opening the door. She stepped out and stood at the edge of the lot for a moment. Then she pushed open a section of chain link fence that had come loose from its post, just wide enough to step through, and walked to the center of the lot. She stood there with her back to the car. Her arms were at her sides. Frank kept the engine running. He turned off the app so no new fares would route to him. He didn't watch her directly. He watched the street instead, an occasional car passing 2 blocks over, a light in a window across the road, a dog barking somewhere and then going quiet. After 14 minutes, she came back. She got in. She said a different address, a motel called the Lakeview, on the other side of the city. He drove there. She paid cash when they arrived. She thanked him. She got out. That was the last he saw of her. He drove home and went to sleep. He didn't think about it until the weekend. He wasn't sure why it had stayed with him. He had carried stranger things over 9 years. The man who asked to stop at 3 separate storage units at 3 a.m. without explanation. The woman who spent the entire ride on the phone crying in a language he didn't know. This had been quiet, nearly unremarkable, a woman who wanted to stand in an empty lot in the middle of the night. But he kept coming back to the fence, specifically to the section that had come loose from its post, the way she had found it immediately, without looking, the way her hand had gone to the exact place where it gave. Not like someone trying it for the first time, like someone who knew exactly where to push. On Saturday morning, he typed 114 Meredith Street into a search engine. The first result was a real estate listing, a commercial lot for sale, no structures. The second was a city demolition permit from 2013 for the removal of a residential structure at that address. The third was a news article from the local paper, dated March 15, 2011. He clicked on the article. It was short. A man had been killed in his home at 114 Meredith Street on the night of March 14. His name was Douglas Harwick. He was 44 years old. He had been shot once in the kitchen by his wife during what she described as an attack. She had called 911 immediately after. She told police he had come at her with a kitchen knife. She was treated at the hospital and released. The district attorney reviewed the case and declined to prosecute. The house was later sold and demolished in 2013. Frank read it twice. March 14th, he took out his phone and checked his fare history. The pickup had been at 2:47 a.m. on March 14th. He put the phone down and sat for a while. The article included a photograph, a standard portrait, the kind taken at a company event or a neighborhood function. The woman was younger, her hair shorter, her expression more guarded. But the eyes were the same. The posture was the same. He recognized the way she held herself. He searched her name. There was very little. Some community directory listings from before 2011. A mention in a neighborhood association newsletter from 2009. Nothing after the case was closed. No social media. No current address. She had, as far as the internet was concerned, simply stopped. He thought about calling the police. He turned the idea over for several days. But what would he say? A woman he believed to be the wife in a closed self-defense case had stood in an empty lot on the anniversary of her husband's death. The case had been reviewed and closed 15 years ago. She had committed no crime. She was legally free. There was no report to make. He thought about the quote in the article, from a neighbor who had lived 2 doors down. They kept to themselves, the neighbor had said. You'd hear things sometimes, at night. The reporter had not followed up. The neighbor had not elaborated. It was the kind of sentence that meant everything and said nothing. He didn't call. He went back to the article once more and read the whole thing again. What he kept returning to was the cash. She had paid at the motel in cash instead of using the app's payment system. That meant she had planned it, come prepared to leave no record, no credit card trail, no route that could be traced back to her name. He thought about what kind of person builds that kind of plan. Someone who has been careful for a long time. Someone who has learned that certain things require a different kind of accounting. He didn't know how many times she had made the drive. He didn't know when she had started, whether it was the first year or the 5th, or whether one March she had simply found herself outside that fence without quite knowing how she'd gotten there. He knew only the 14 minutes, the arms at her sides, the way she had found the gap in the fence without looking. He looked at his fare log one more time. In 9 years of night shifts, he had completed over 12,000 trips. He had never thought much about any single fare after it was done. That was the job, you moved on. He had never once looked up an address before. Over the following week he found himself thinking about it at odd moments. While waiting at a hotel pickup zone, while eating alone at the diner he went to on Wednesday nights, while sitting in his car watching rain on the windshield. Not obsessively, more like the way you return, without deciding to a door you're not sure you should have noticed. He thought about the 9 years of fares he had moved through without a second look. The man who cried from the hospital to the hotel. What had happened in that hospital? The teenager who wanted 2 hours of driving with no destination. Where were they going, and what were they delaying? Frank had always taken pride in not prying. He had told himself that was respect. That night on Meredith Street made him wonder if it was also a kind of distance he had chosen without ever making the choice consciously. He didn't look up any other fares. He wasn't sure what he would do with what he found. 3 weeks after the fair, on a Thursday afternoon in early April, Frank drove to 114 Meredith Street. He told himself he was just passing through the neighborhood. He knew that wasn't true. He parked on the opposite side of the street and sat in the car for a few minutes before getting out. The lot looked different in daylight, smaller, somehow, and more ordinary. The chain-link fence caught the pale spring light. The concrete foundation was cleaner than he had imagined, old and pitted, but still clearly the outline of a house. The street lamp was off, its column invisible in the afternoon. The section of fence where she had pushed through was still loose. He crossed the street and stood at the fence for a while without going in. He was thinking about what she had done there, not what she had felt. He didn't presume to know that. But what she had done. She had driven to this city, probably from somewhere else. She had taken a car under a name that didn't connect to her. She had stood in this lot for 14 minutes. Then she had gone back to a motel, and the next morning she had left. She did this every year. He understood, standing there in the April light, that she was not coming back to grieve. The man in that article was not someone she was mourning. She was not standing in that lot for him. She was coming back because this was the only place in the world where what happened to her was real in a way that did not depend on memory, or testimony, or what other people believed or chose not to believe. The foundation was in the ground. The address existed on city records. The event had happened here, and this empty lot was its only remaining evidence, fixed, physical, undeniable. She needed to stand somewhere and know, not feel, know, that it had happened, that she had survived it, and that the house where it happened was gone and would not be rebuilt. Frank stood at the fence for about 5 minutes. He did not go through the gap. Then he walked back to his car and drove home. He didn't take another night shift. He put in a request to go days only. His dispatcher asked if everything was okay. He said yes, he was just ready for a change. That was the end of the conversation. He didn't tell anyone about the fair, or the article, or the afternoon on Meredith Street. There was nothing to tell, technically. Nothing that added up to a story with a conclusion. What he had was an image. A woman standing in a vacant lot at 2:47 in the morning with her arms at her sides, her back to the car, facing the far end of the lot and whatever she needed to see there. 14 minutes. The pale yellow light of a single lamp that was too far away to reach her. He didn't know what had happened after she left the motel. He didn't know where she lived now, or whether she had come back the following March, or whether there would come a year when she finally didn't. He had no way of knowing, and no right to ask. He thought about her differently each time the thought came back. Sometimes he thought about the cost of going, the planning it required, the distance, the cash, the careful erasure of a route. Sometimes he thought about the cost of not going. Which one, over 15 years, had been the harder payment? The last night he drove, he took 4 fares between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. He thought, briefly, about each one. Where they were going, what they weren't saying. He didn't look any of them up. He just drove. # story notes. Fictional narrative. All characters, names, addresses, and events are invented.